Hello, and welcome to PlotFall. Tonight, our story takes us into the world of why you wouldn't survive a day in Victorian London. Before we begin, if you find value in these stories, perhaps take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps others find the channel. You can also let me know in the comments where you're listening from and the time. It's always fascinating to see our quiet community grow around the world. Now find a comfortable position, perhaps dim the lights or turn on a soft fan for background noise, and let's ease into tonight's story together. Let your eyelids gently flutter open, not to the familiar comfort of your own room, but to a London morning, over a century and a half ago. There's no soft alarm, no gentle nudge from a loved one. Instead, your first sensation might be the raw, damp chill seeping through whatever thin blanket or pile of shared rags constitutes your bed. The air itself tastes stale, heavy with the scent of coal smoke already beginning to lace the pre-dawn gloom, mingling with the closer, less romantic aroma of unwashed bodies and yesterday's lingering dinners. Perhaps what truly pulls you from sleep is the noise. A distant, mournful ship's horn from the unseen Thames, quickly overlaid by the closer, more insistent clatter of iron-rimmed cartwheels on uneven cobblestones, the sharp cries of early vendors already hawking their meager wares. "Milko," a voice might call, or the rougher shout of a night-soil man completing his grim nocturnal rounds just as the city stirs. Forget the gentle hum of a modern city. This is a raw, organic clamor, a symphony of survival already in full voice before the sun has even properly shown its face. Your bed, likely a thin straw pallet on a hard floor, offers no real solace, perhaps even rustling with tiny, unseen companions sharing your meager warmth. The light, when it finally dares to penetrate the grime on a shared small-paned window or through the cracks in the wooden shutters, is a reluctant, gray smear. It doesn't illuminate so much as reveal the dinginess of your surroundings. This is your Victorian dawn, stark and unforgiving, and the day, with all its challenges, has barely begun. And as you lie there, listening to that symphony of survival, perhaps for a moment longer than you should, the first true sensation to greet you isn't the weak light, but the cold. It's a cold quite unlike anything our modern bones are accustomed to, a damp, clinging chill that seems to seep from the very walls and floorboards themselves. This isn't the crisp, dry cold of a winter morning enjoyed from behind double-glazed windows. Oh no! This is an invasive presence, a constant companion in the unheated or poorly heated rooms of Victorian London. Imagine the air, heavy with moisture, your breath pluming visibly even indoors, a small, fleeting cloud in the gloom. The floor beneath your bare feet, if you're brave enough to place them there directly, would be icy, unforgiving, perhaps slick with a thin film of condensation that has gathered overnight. Any fabric, your thin blanket, the clothes you might have left out, would feel clammy, stubbornly refusing to ever feel truly dry. It's a chill that burrows deep, making your joints ache before the day has even truly asked anything of you, a dampness that seems to settle right into your marrow. The smell of damp wool, or wet, slowly decaying wood, might be the first perfume of your day, mingling with the ever-present undercurrent of coal smoke that has already snaked its way into every nook and cranny of your dwelling. There's no miraculous flick of a switch for instant warmth, no comforting, gentle hum of a radiator. There's just you, the persistent gray light, and this penetrating, unwelcoming cold that has already made itself thoroughly at home in your very being. It clings to you like a second, unwelcome skin, a constant, wearying reminder of the city's raw, untamed edge, long before you even contemplate the trials waiting on the streets outside. Bracing yourself against that persistent chill, you might finally venture forth, perhaps pulling a threadbare shawl a little tighter. And as you step across the threshold, the air that greets you, well, it's an experience all its own. Imagine taking that first deep breath of London morning. It's not the crisp, clean air you might hope for. Instead, it's a dense, almost tangible tapestry of scents, woven together into something uniquely Victorian, something that clings to the very fabric of your clothes. The coal smoke, a familiar acquaintance from within your own four walls, now asserts itself with an almost suffocating authority outdoors. It hangs heavy, a gritty, acrid perfume that seems to coat your tongue and sting the back of your throat with every inhalation. Beneath this dominant city note, a more insidious aroma often lingers, a faint, cloying sweetness perhaps, mixed with the unmistakable damp tang of decay. This, my friend, is the ever-present ghost of uncollected refuse, the quiet, constant reminder of a city groaning under its own weight, its gutters and alleyways breathing out their secrets. And then, layered upon these foundational odors, come the specific contributions of 1,000 busy workshops and industries. The sharp, almost chemical bite from the tanneries not too far away, where hides are being treated. Perhaps the yeasty, sour waft from a local brewery, or the distinct, metallic tang carried on the breeze from a smithy already hard at work, its forge-breathing fire. It's a potent, inescapable cocktail, this London air, a far cry from any perfumed garden you might imagine. This is the city's true breath, heavy, complex, and a daily assault on the senses that you'd simply have to learn to tolerate, to breathe as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And as your nose slowly, reluctantly acclimates to this pervasive miasma, your ears begin to pick up the city's own peculiar orchestra tuning up. There's no distant, muffled thrum of engines like today, no low hum of unseen electricity. Instead, the sounds are immediate, sharp, and undeniably physical. Imagine, first, the unmistakable clatter of iron-rimmed wheels on uneven cobblestones. Not a smooth roll, but a jarring, percussive rhythm that echoes between the tall, soot-stained buildings. Each cart, each carriage, each dray announces its passage with this metallic clamor, a constant reminder of the city's relentless motion. Then, beneath that, the distinct, almost musical clip-clop of horses' hooves. Hundreds of them, thousands perhaps, their iron shoes striking the hard ground with a rhythmic insistence. Some are slow and plodding, pulling heavy loads, their steps echoing the drudgery. Others are quicker, more spirited, carrying riders on their urgent business. It's a sound so fundamental to the Victorian street, it would be the very heartbeat of your morning, a pulse you'd feel as much as hear, vibrating up through the soles of your inadequate shoes. Soon, human voices begin to weave themselves into this growing symphony. Not polite murmurs, but the full-throated cries of street vendors, each hawking their wares with a unique, practiced cadence. Fresh lavender, sweet lavender, one might call, their voice cutting through the chill morning air, a momentary fragile sweetness. Oysters! Fresh oysters! Another would bellow, competing for your attention, or rather, the attention of anyone with a halfpenny to spare. This isn't the gentle ambience of a modern marketplace. It's a vibrant, often cacophonous, battle for survival, sung out loud, each call a tiny drama unfolding on the grimy stage of the London streets. And, as these cries merge, truly taking hold of the soundscape, imagine now stepping out from a doorway, not just hearing the city, but being plunged into Drawbit. You're no longer an observer from a quiet, curtained window. You are suddenly, inescapably part of a relentless flowing river of humanity. People brush past, a constant jostling stream of shoulders, elbows, and hurried, often gaunt, faces, each individual a tiny current within this colossal smoky hive. There's no personal space as you might understand it, no polite bubble, just a constant, pressing throng, moving through streets that feel more like shadowed, narrow canyons carved between the buildings. Looming over you, a veritable forest of structures, 5, 6, sometimes even 7 stories high, lean inwards as if conspiring. Their brickwork stained a deep, mournful black by decades, no, centuries, of clinging coal smoke. Sunlight, if it dares to penetrate this dense canopy of stone and soot, arrives as weak, dusty shafts, like hesitant spotlights on the churning, anonymous mass below. It's an intensity that doesn't just fill your ears, but seems to press in from all sides, a relentless thrum of life, packed so tightly it might feel like the city itself is breathing down your neck. a vast, indifferent organism. The sheer unyielding density of it all, people, structures, activity, and the ever-present scent of damp wool and grime, would likely leave a mind accustomed to wider avenues and clearer skies feeling utterly dazed, perhaps even a little lost, a tiny insignificant speck in this overwhelming urban machine. And after navigating that relentless pressing tide of humanity, that overwhelming symphony of urban existence, you might crave the simple grounding act of washing. A splash of water to clear the grime in the mind. But here, even that small comfort is a world away from what you know. There is no gleaming porcelain sink, no instantly obliging tap ready to dispense clear, warm water at your command, a convenience so ingrained it's almost invisible to us. Instead, picture this. You might begin your day, or attempt to end it, by fetching water. Perhaps from a communal pump down the street, its iron handle stiff and cold to the touch, the rhythmic, often weary creak, a familiar sound in the neighborhood. A queue might already be forming, others clutching their pails, their faces etched with the day's toil or the anticipation of it. The water that eventually gushes forth could be a pale, cloudy brown, carrying with it the faint, unsettling aroma of the overburdened Thames, or the city's countless hidden seepages. Hot water? That's a precious commodity, a luxury requiring scarce fuel for the fire and patient effort to heat even a small basinful. So your wash, when you could manage it, would likely be with this cold, or at best, tepid water, in a chipped enamel bowl or a rough wooden bucket. The soap, if you possessed any, might be a coarse, lye-heavy block, harsh on the skin, and unlikely to lather much in the hard, often dubiously sourced water. Imagine the shock of that icy liquid on your skin, especially in the persistent damp chill of a poorly heated room. It would be a brief, almost perfunctory ritual against the pervasive dirt, a stark reminder that cleanliness, a concept we often take for granted, was a hard-won, infrequent battle, often leaving you with a lingering sense of being not quite clean, a faint film of the city always subtly present. And just as that faint film of city grime clings to you, a residue of London that soap and cold water barely disturbed, another, more pressing need soon makes itself known. The simple act of answering nature's call, a private moment we now barely register, becomes a very different affair. Forget your tiled sanctuary, your flushing porcelain throne. You might venture out into the chill air of a communal yard, perhaps down a set of rickety wooden stairs, slippery with who knows what. Here, a small, often dilapidated wooden structure stands the privy. Often shared by dozens, its atmosphere is thick, a potent cocktail of ammonia and decay that clings to the back of your throat. The darkness inside is profound, broken only by slivers of light through cracks in the warped planks, revealing a scene best left undescribed. Privacy is a forgotten luxury, speed a grim necessity. Alternatively, especially in the cold, dark hours before dawn, there's the chamber pot, a ceramic or metal vessel kept under the bed, its contents a silent, pungent testament to the night. Come morning, someone, perhaps you, perhaps a weary servant if you're fortunate, has the unenviable task of carrying it through the house, down those same stairs, to empty it into that same overflowing privy, or perhaps, with a cautious glance, into the street gutter. The air, you realize, is never truly free of these foundational smells of human existence, a constant low hum beneath the city's louder noises. With the air still thick with yesterday's life, your day truly begins with the monumental task of dressing, a ritual that could consume a significant portion of your morning. It's not a simple matter of pulling on a shirt and trousers, not by a long shot. Imagine, first, the feel of a linen or cotton chemise against your skin in the dim, often chilly, light of your room. Perhaps a little coarse, a stark contrast to the day's demands for softness. Then come the drawers, another layer before the main event. If you are a woman of a certain standing, or aspiring to be, the corset awaits. This isn't some flimsy modern garment. It's an architecture of whalebone or steel, sturdy canvas, and countless laces, designed to sculpt your very torso into the fashionable and often quite unnatural silhouette. You can almost hear the quiet, insistent hiss of the laces as they are pulled taut, perhaps by your own straining fingers, or those of a maid if you are fortunate. Feel the unyielding pressure begin to encase your ribs, a gentle but firm reminder of societal expectation pressing in, quite literally. Breathing suddenly becomes a more conscious effort, doesn't it? Each inhale is a negotiation with the stiffened fabric, a shallower affair than your body truly craves. And this is just the foundation. Over this engineered core, layers upon layers will be added. Multiple petticoats, perhaps one of crinoline steel hoops or horsehair canvas, to give your skirts the desired voluminous, bell-like shape, rustling with every imagined step, catching on unseen obstacles. Then the gown itself, often fashioned from heavy wools in winter, or silks and starched cottons in summer that, while beautiful, offer little give and add considerable dragging weight. Just standing, let alone moving with any grace, becomes an exercise in endurance, a silent testament to the era's peculiar and often punishing relationship with the human form. The simple act of bending to pick something up, a carefully orchestrated and frequently quite difficult maneuver, a world away from casual ease. Your entire posture is dictated not by comfort, but by construction, a constant subtle battle waged between your body and your clothes. But even as you stand there, a carefully constructed mannequin in your layers of fabric, an unseen world is already making its acquaintance with you. It's in the air that swirls around your stiff collar, the very air that fills your lungs with each constrained breath. This London air, a thick, soupy miasma of coal smoke, river fog, and the unmentionable effluvia of a million souls packed tightly together, carries far more than just unpleasant smells. It carries life of a sort, a teeming microscopic menagerie of bacteria and viruses, ancient foes present in concentrations your modern senses can't even register, yet to which your body has never been introduced. Your immune system, so adept at battling the sanitized challenges of the 21st century, is like a pristine, unwritten book in the face of these Victorian veterans. Every cough from a passerby, every brush against a damp, unseen surface, every sip of water from a questionable source, unleashes a fresh wave of these invisible invaders. They are a relentless, silent tide, and your body, for all its modern marvels, simply wouldn't possess the historical memory, the hardened resilience, to mount an effective defense against such a concentrated, archaic onslaught. The fight would begin before you even truly notice the city's grime on your skin, a quiet, internal battle already tilting decisively against you, long before your first Victorian day drew to a close. And so, with that unseen internal siege already well underway, you might find yourself seeking the simple comfort of a morning meal. A precarious breakfast, as it turns out, in this sprawling, grimy metropolis. The dawn, if you can even call it that, through the perpetual smog, barely illuminates the small, perhaps slightly stale loaf of bread placed before you. It looks white enough, reassuringly so, but this whiteness is often a cunning disguise. Your first bite might reveal a strange, almost metallic tang, or a slightly gritty texture your tongue can't quite place. That's likely the alum, generously mixed in by the baker to bleach inferior flour, or perhaps a dusting of chalk or even plaster of Paris to add a deceptive weight and heft. Then there's the milk, pooled in a chipped earthenware cup. It might appear thin and bluish, a telltale sign of generous dilution with water, fetched from who knows what questionable public pump. Or, conversely, it could possess an unnatural, uniform whiteness, perhaps a little chalk dust stirred in for body, maybe a hint of borax to keep it from souring too quickly in the unrefrigerated air. Each sip is a gamble, a quiet introduction of yet more foreign substances into a system already reeling. This simple sustenance, meant to fortify you for the day ahead, instead becomes another subtle, insidious challenge. The aromas of this breakfast are muted, perhaps a faint sourness from the bread, a watery neutrality from the milk, all overshadowed by the ever-present London air. A cocktail of coal smoke, damp earth, and uncollected refuse. There's no rich scent of baking, no creamy sweetness. Just the quiet, unsettling reality that even the most basic elements of life here are fraught with hidden deceptions, each mouthful a small, unknowing act of trust in a system riddled with compromise. Your body, expecting nourishment, receives instead a perplexing concoction, another tiny battleground in the unceasing war for survival in this Victorian world. With that less than satisfying meal settled, or perhaps just settling, you decide to venture out. The simple act of opening your door is an assault. The air that greets you is thicker, somehow, than the fog within your lodgings. It carries the sharp tang of horse manure, the damp, earthy smell of the Thames mud that seems to permeate everything, and a pervasive, acrid note of coal smoke, so dense it almost has a taste, coating the back of your throat. You brace yourself and step onto what generously might be called a pavement. Though, in truth, it's more of a suggestion, a slightly less chaotic strip amidst the general turmoil. Your boots, if you're fortunate enough to own a sturdy pair, sink slightly into a viscous layer of mire. It's a concoction of mud, yes, thick and cloying like treacle, but also rotting vegetable matter from overturned market stalls, the occasional discarded scrap of something unidentifiable, and a near-constant slick of animal droppings from the countless horses, dogs, and perhaps even pigs that share these thoroughfares. Each step is a negotiation, a careful dance to avoid the deepest puddles of questionable, rainbow-sheened liquid, or the more solid, treacherous hazards lurking beneath the grime. The sounds begin to build around you. The relentless clatter of iron-shod wheels on uneven cobbles, the hoarse cries of street sellers hawking everything from pies of dubious origin to mended shoes, the distant braying of an overworked donkey, all mingling into a constant, low, overwhelming roar. This isn't just a walk, it's an immersion, a full-bodied encounter with the unfiltered reality of London life, where even the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other requires constant vigilance and a remarkably strong stomach. And just when you think your senses have acclimatized, that your stomach has somehow fortified itself against the visual and auditory chaos, the very air you breathe decides to join the assault. Imagine, if you will, the summer of 1858. Not just any summer, but a season so fiercely hot it cooked the city, and with it, the ailing heart of London, the River Thames. For decades, this once majestic waterway had become an open sewer, a dumping ground for every imaginable waste, human and industrial. Now, under the relentless sun, it fermented, the water level dropping to reveal thick banks of reeking black ooze. The result was an event so profoundly offensive to the nose, it earned its own memorable, if understated, name, the Great Stink. This wasn't merely an unpleasant background odor, it was a physical presence, a thick, cloying, eye-watering miasma that clung to everything and everyone. Think of the smell of decay, of untreated sewage, of chemical byproducts, all magnified by the oppressive heat, an invisible blanket smothering the capital. Curtains were soaked in chloride of lime, handkerchiefs doused in scent were pressed to faces, but these were feeble defenses against the pervasive, throat-catching stench. The smell invaded homes, businesses, and even the hallowed halls of Parliament, where MPs, visibly gagging on the fumes wafting from their own river, seriously debated fleeing the city altogether. It was a truly democratic sort of misery, this colossal stink, respecting no social standing, a grim, olfactory reminder that the city's lifeblood had become its poison. The very breath you took was a gamble, a lungful of London's darkest secret made manifest. Having somehow held your breath against the city's pervasive miasma, let's imagine you now need to venture out, perhaps to find some work or simply to get from one place to another. You step from a doorway, your lungs still faintly protesting, and find yourself on the very edge of a Victorian thoroughfare. The ground beneath your feet isn't the smooth, predictable pavement of our modern world. Instead, it's a treacherous mosaic of uneven cobblestones, slick with a film of mud, slimy with horse droppings, and often littered with the detritus of a million hurried lives. Now, try to cross this street. Look up. Before you is not an orderly, predictable flow of traffic. It's a churning, clattering, almost organic river of movement. Massive, horse-drawn omnibuses, heavy as small houses, rumble past, their iron-rimmed wheels striking sparks from the stones, the sheer force of their passage vibrating through the soles of your thin shoes. Their drivers, perched high above, often seem entirely indifferent to the tiny figures scurrying below. Nimbler, but no less perilous, are the hansom cabs, darting through any perceived gap with a speed that feels utterly reckless. Add to this the lumbering drays, the costermongers' carts, and the general press of humanity, all vying for space. There are no traffic lights to offer a moment's blessed respite, no painted zebras to suggest a safe corridor. Crossing the road is an act of sheer, unadulterated daring, a frantic, almost desperate ballet performed between thundering hooves and relentlessly spinning wheels. The air, already a challenge, is now thick with the smell of hot, damp horses, the sharp tang of coal smoke from countless chimneys, and the metallic scent of overworked machinery. It's filled with the percussive orchestra of iron on stone, the gruff shouts of drivers, the jingle of harnesses, the creak of axles, and the low, constant roar of a city that never truly sleeps. Each attempt to navigate this chaos would be a gamble, a silent, hurried prayer whispered as you dart between the vehicles, your heart thumping a frantic rhythm against the urban din, a constant, low hum of anxiety, your unwelcome companion. And if the main thoroughfares are a bewildering assault on the senses, imagine for a moment stepping away from that clamor. Perhaps you're seeking a shortcut, a fleeting moment of quiet, or you've simply been jostled off course. You turn into a narrower passage, hoping for reprieve. But what you find is a different kind of challenge, a silent, creeping disorientation. Welcome to the labyrinth. These are the hidden veins of Victorian London, a dense network of winding alleys, cramped courts, and shadowy mews, many of which seem to have entirely forgotten the concept of a straight line. Street signs are a luxury, often faded, missing, or placed so high and coated in grime, they're practically invisible. As daylight wanes, or even under the perpetual gray pall of a London sky, the light here becomes a dim, reluctant visitor. A solitary gas lamp might offer a small, flickering oasis of visibility, its sickly yellow glow doing little to penetrate the deeper shadows that cling to every doorway and recess. More often, you are guided only by the faint, murky light that filters down between the tall, soot-stained buildings that lean in, as if conspiring to block out the sky. Then, the smoke descends. Not a gentle mist, but the infamous London pea souper. A thick, acrid fog, tinged yellow-brown from the coal fires of 1,000,000 hearths and 1,000 factories. It rolls in silently, swallowing landmarks, muffling sounds, and transforming the already confusing maze into an almost featureless void. It stings your eyes, catches at the back of your throat, and you can almost taste the grit of it. Every shape becomes indistinct, every corner a potential dead end, or worse. The cold, damp brickwork grazes your shoulder, the uneven cobbles trip your unwary feet, and the only certainty is the clinging smell of soot and something vaguely foul. Finding your destination now is less about navigation and more about a desperate blind hope. And should that desperate blind hope somehow guide you towards the edge of this suffocating gloom, you'd find that even reaching a destination on the other side of the road presents an entirely new kind of peril. Stepping off the relative safety of the pavement, if you can even call that narrow, crowded, often filthy strip safe, is an act of sheer bravery, or perhaps simple, grim necessity. There are no friendly green men here, no zebra stripes painted on the grimy cobbles to offer a moment's respite. Instead, you face a churning, thundering river of iron wood and straining horseflesh. Imagine the scene. Enormous, multi-horse omnibuses, swaying precariously, their top decks crammed with passengers who seem oblivious to the chaos below. Nimble hansom cabs, driven with a terrifying disregard for pedestrian limbs, dart through any available gap, their drivers bellowing. And then, there are the drays, vast, lumbering wagons pulled by powerful, sweating horses, their iron-shod wheels thundering over the uneven cobbles, each impact a small earthquake beneath your thin-soled boots. The air is a cacophony. The relentless clatter of hooves against stone, the grinding of wheels, the sharp shouts and whip cracks of drivers, and the constant creak and groan of overworked wood and strained leather. You edge forward, eyes darting, trying to predict the unpredictable dance of metal and beast. A cabbie, perched high, might curse as you hesitate, his words lost in the general din, but his sentiment clear. The ground beneath is slick with mud. A thick, glutinous paste, often mixed with horse droppings and goodness knows what else, a testament to the thousands of animals that powered this relentless city. A near miss sends your heart hammering against your ribs, the hot, steamy breath of a passing dray horse ghosting your cheek, its massive flank just inches away. Each successful crossing feels less like a simple errand and more like a minor, breathless victory snatched from the jaws of a very loud, very smelly, and very dangerous chaos. To survive this daily gauntlet required a sixth sense, a gambler's nerve, and no small amount of sheer dumb luck. Having navigated the treacherous streets, another, more persistent anxiety begins to gnaw at you. The hollow ache of an empty stomach and the even deeper fear of an empty pocket. Because in this sprawling, indifferent metropolis, survival isn't just about dodging runaway carts. It's about securing the pennies that will keep you from the dreaded workhouse, or worse. The brief thrill of surviving the morning crossing swiftly fades, replaced by the grinding, daily imperative to find sustenance, to earn your meager keep in a city that truly owes you nothing. So picture yourself joining the pre-dawn tide of humanity, a silent, shuffling river of souls flowing towards the docks, the factories, the grand houses. Anywhere a pair of hands might be needed, however briefly, however brutally. The air, still carrying the damp chill of the fading night, feels thick with the murmur of 1,000 hushed hopes, the faint, shared scent of damp wool, stale bodies, and an almost palpable desperation. You stand shoulder to shoulder with countless others, a sea of faces etched with worry, each one a competitor, each one just as hungry, each one praying silently for the chance at the day's bread. A burly foreman might eventually appear, his gaze sweeping dismissively, perhaps even contemptuously, over the assembled hopefuls. A pointed finger, a gruff, barely audible word. You and you and you there. And for a lucky, desperate few, a day's grueling labor is secured. For the rest, it's the slow, disheartening trudge away, or the even longer, colder wait, clinging to the fragile hope that some other master, some other chance, might yet appear before the day is entirely lost. This was the harsh lottery of London labor, where your next meal so often depended on catching a fleeting, indifferent glance, or simply being in the right place at the most unforgiving of moments. And as you walk away, perhaps unnoticed by those masters, your gaze might fall upon another, even more sobering aspect of London's workforce. Tiny hands, everywhere. Little figures, some no older than 5 or 6, dart through the grimy thoroughfares, their small faces often etched with a weariness that belies their tender years. You might see a small boy, his face smudged with soot, diligently sweeping a path across a muddy street for a hoped-for penny, his broom almost as tall as he is. His eyes, when they meet yours, are not the bright, curious eyes of childhood, but something older, more knowing, perhaps a little hollow. Further on, clustered near a factory gate, you'd find them children spilling out at the end of a 12-hour shift, their movements heavy and slow, their small shoulders slumped beneath thin, patched clothing. The air around them might carry the faint, acrid smell of chemicals from a dye works, or the cloying sweetness of processed sugar from a confectionery, a scent clinging stubbornly to their threadbare clothes. They aren't playing. They are miniature adults, their childhoods traded for a few meager coins to help their families survive. Imagine their tiny fingers, nimble and quick, perfect for the intricate, repetitive tasks in a textile mill or a match factory. Tasks that would wear down even grown hands, let alone those so small. The constant whir and clatter of machinery would be the relentless soundtrack to their days, a deafening, inescapable hum that vibrated through their very bones. It's a sight that would, to our modern eyes, be utterly heartbreaking, a stark reminder of how differently childhood was perceived and how brutally it could be curtailed by the unforgiving demands of the age. That relentless soundtrack, the whir and clatter that vibrated through their very bones, was no different for the adult workers. In fact, if you managed to secure a position, it was likely within the echoing vastness of a factory, the heart of this new industrial age. Imagine, for a moment, stepping onto that factory floor. The air itself seems to thrum, heavy with the scent of hot oil, metal dust, and the faint, ever-present aroma of coal smoke seeping in from the city beyond. The noise is the first thing that truly assaults you, a deafening, relentless cacophony. It's not a single sound, but a brutal orchestra of them. The thunderous, rhythmic pounding of steam hammers, the high-pitched shriek of metal cutting metal, the clattering, chattering roar of 100 looms or lathes working in frantic unison. Conversation is impossible, reduced to frantic hand gestures or a desperate shout directly into someone's ear, a shout that is often swallowed by the mechanical din. You can feel the vibrations through the very soles of your worn-out shoes, a constant, unsettling tremor. Around you, immense machines loom like iron beasts in the dim, flickering gaslight, or the weak sunlight struggling through grime-caked windows. Belts slap and whir, gears grind with ferocious power, and pistons hiss with an energy that feels both magnificent and terrifyingly indifferent to the soft human bodies toiling beside them. There are no bright yellow safety guards here, no emergency cutoffs, just the raw, exposed power. A moment's lapse in concentration, a tired misstep, a sleeve caught in a spinning cog, and the consequences could be devastating, immediate, and met with little more than a brief pause in the relentless pursuit of production. To survive a day was to navigate this mechanical jungle with constant vigilance, a feat in itself. But the dangers of Victorian London weren't always so loud, so explosively mechanical. Sometimes, survival meant enduring a different kind of grind. A quieter, more insidious exhaustion, hidden away behind the grand facades of elegant townhouses, deep within the world of domestic service. This realm, too, had its own particular set of trials, far removed from the roar of the factory floor, but no less demanding on body and spirit. Imagine, for a moment, not entering through the grand, polished front door, but descending into the labyrinthine network of passages below stairs. Your day here would begin long before the first rays of sun even thought about gracing the city's rooftops. In the damp chill of a basement kitchen or a cramped attic room, shared perhaps with several others, the air already stale before the day's toils even commenced. The atmosphere down here is heavy, thick with the smells of coal dust, yesterday's cooking, perhaps the lingering ghostly scent of boiled cabbage, and the sharp, clean tang of lye soap. Light is a scarce commodity. A sputtering candle here, a dim gas jet there, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls that often wept with moisture. The silence, if you could call it that, is punctuated by the scurrying of unseen things in the walls, or the distant, imperious jingle of a servant's bell, a summons that could come at any hour, for any whim. Your hands would quickly become raw from scrubbing flagstone floors with harsh brushes, polishing endless silverware, until your own tired reflection stared back, or heaving heavy coal scuttles up flight after flight of narrow, winding back stairs. The heat from the massive kitchen range in summer would be stifling, clinging to you like a wet woolen blanket, while the biting cold of winter would seep into your bones through thin, darned stockings and worn-out shoes. There was no real escape from the endless cycle of tasks, each one designed to keep the grand household above running with an effortless grace you would rarely witness and certainly never share. This was a world of unseen labor, where your very existence was predicated on being invisible yet indispensable. To survive here was to embrace a stoic endurance, a quiet resignation to the relentless demands, finding small, almost imperceptible solaces in the briefest moments of rest, if they came at all. A different kind of jungle, perhaps, but one where the threats were of pervasive damp, chronic exhaustion, illness born of poor conditions, and the slow, quiet erosion of spirit in the face of unending servitude. While some toiled unseen below stairs, their labor a hidden engine of grander households, others faced the city's indifference out in the open, their daily struggle a stark, yet somehow equally invisible, public spectacle. Imagine, if you will, the banks of the Thames when the tide ebbs low, not as a picturesque scene, but as a vast gray wound exposing the river's underbelly. This was the perilous hunting ground of the mudlarks. Often children, their bare feet would sink deep into the cold, clinging mud, a foul-smelling mixture of silt, sewage, and industrial waste. Their small hands, chapped and raw, endlessly sifted through the slick ooze, feeling for the telltale hardness of a lost coin, a nail, a fragment of old rope, or even bones to sell. The air here would be thick with the river's damp, metallic breath, the sharp tang of decay, and the ever-present grit of coal dust. Each find, however small, was a tiny victory against the gnawing hunger, a brief reprieve from the chilling damp that seeped into their very bones. Then, picture the streets themselves, not the grand, gaslit thoroughfares, but the crowded, jostling alleyways and side markets. Here, the street sellers, their voices often a low, persistent hum, rather than a strident shout, offered their meager wares from trays or shawls spread on the damp paving stones. Perhaps a girl no older than 10, with a tray of wilting watercress, its faint, peppery scent a fleeting whisper of green in the otherwise heavy, smoky air. Or an old man, his knuckles swollen and his fingers blue with cold, carefully arranging a few precious matchboxes, each one representing a fraction of a loaf of bread. Their existence was a daily tightrope walk over a chasm of destitution. Each halfpenny earned a small, desperate victory. These were the city's gleaners, their lives a testament to a tenacious, almost heartbreaking resilience, wringing survival from the very detritus of a thriving, yet unforgiving, metropolis. That same unforgiving metropolis, however, still demanded fuel. As midday casts its weak, gray light through the perpetual haze, the gnawing emptiness in your stomach becomes a more pressing concern. Forget quaint cafes or carefully prepared meals. Your lunch, if you can afford one, will likely come from the bustling, odorous theater of the streets, where every vendor's cry is a gamble. Perhaps you're drawn by the dubious allure of a one-penny pie. The vendor, his face smudged with soot and something unidentifiable, hawks his wares with a desperate cheer that barely masks the strain. The pastry, a greasy, pale yellow, encases a filling of, well, that's the perennial mystery, isn't it? It smells vaguely of meat, certainly of hot fat, and perhaps a hint of yesterday's rain mingling with the dust of the street. You might take a bite, the crust flaking away to reveal a grayish, lumpy interior. Each chew is a small act of faith, a silent prayer against the lurking threat of ptomaine poisoning. Or, maybe for a fleeting moment of daring, you consider the oyster stalls. Oysters, surprisingly cheap, were the fast food of their day. Shucked open with a grimy knife, often wiped on an even grimer apron, and swallowed down with a splash of watery vinegar. They tasted of the sea, yes, but also, disturbingly often, of the sewage-laden estuaries from which they were dredged. A momentary pleasure, perhaps, followed by days of regret. Lunch was less a nourishing pause and more a risky transaction, a brief truce with hunger in a world where freshness was a luxury few could comprehend, and survival often tasted faintly of despair. That lingering taste of despair might be compounded by a growing thirst, a dry, scratching feeling at the back of your throat. Your eyes might scan the bustling street, perhaps for a communal water pump, its iron handle worn smooth by countless hands, or a vendor selling glasses of what they claimed was fresh water. A simple drink seems like such a basic necessity, a straightforward comfort, but this is where Victorian London plays one of its cruelest tricks. That cool draft you crave, the liquid that promises life, could just as easily be a harbinger of a swift and agonizing end. Imagine a glass held up to the weak sunlight, filtering through the ever-present smog. It might appear deceptively clear, or perhaps it carries a faint, telltale cloudiness, a subtle sediment settling at the bottom, tiny, unwelcome particles of the city's vast, unseen refuse. The smell might be faintly earthy, or carry a metallic tang you'd try to ignore out of sheer desperation. Much of London's drinking water was, in reality, a diluted, dangerous soup. It was often drawn directly from the Thames, a river that graciously, and quite publicly, accepted the entirety of the city's waste. Or perhaps it came from a shallow well, dug perilously close to overflowing cesspits, their foul contents seeping slowly, inexorably, into the surrounding earth, and, consequently, the water table. These invisible contaminants, the unseen passengers in every cup, were the potent agents of diseases like cholera and typhoid. A simple thirst-quenching drink could invite these specters into your system, transforming vital refreshment into a slow internal siege. So you stand there, parched, the cacophony of the city a dull roar in your ears, the grit of coal dust on your tongue. To drink or not to drink? It wasn't just a choice about quenching thirst. It was a profound gamble, a daily dance with unseen dangers, where even the most fundamental source of life whispered of potential decay. Each sip was an act of faith, or perhaps of weary resignation. The thirst still clings, a dry rasp in your throat. Perhaps you think, something more nourishing, something seemingly pure. Then comes the clatter of the milkman's pail, a sound that might, in another age, promise comfort and health. But this is Victorian London, and even milk, that symbol of wholesome goodness, carries its own shadowy secrets. Imagine the pail, not gleaming but likely dented, its contents a pale, watery blue. This isn't the rich, creamy liquid you might picture. To stretch their profits, sellers often diluted it heavily with water, sometimes straight from that same questionable Thames. To restore its white appearance, chalk might be added, or even plaster of Paris, a gritty disguise for its thinness. Sometimes, to preserve it a little longer in the sweltering, unhygienic streets, substances like borax or other crude chemical preservatives were stirred in, a misguided attempt to fight spoilage that often introduced new harms. And then there were the things you couldn't see, the teeming bacteria thriving in the unpasteurized liquid. Bovine tuberculosis was rampant, easily passed from cow to human through its milk, a slow, creeping illness. For children especially, this wholesome drink could be a death sentence, delivered with a smile by a milkman who likely had no idea of the invisible peril he carried. Each gulp was a gamble, a spoonful of potential disease stirred into the daily diet. Another small, insidious betrayal by the very city that was supposed to sustain you. It wasn't just the liquids, of course, that held such hidden dangers. Consider, if you will, something as fundamental as a loaf of bread, the very staff of life. You might picture it, perhaps with a faint, comforting aroma drifting from a nearby bakery, a hopeful sign in a grimy street, but the Victorian loaf often harbored its own quiet, flowery betrayals. That appealing, almost brilliant whiteness, for instance, wasn't always a testament to pure, finely milled flour. More often it was a chemical illusion, conjured with a liberal dusting of alum. This astringent compound, a salt of aluminium, made even the poorest quality, discolored flour look deceptively pristine. It was a baker's trick that brought a subtle metallic tang and a slow, uncomfortable clench to the stomach. And if alum wasn't enough to achieve the desired look or weight, some bakers, driven by the relentless pursuit of profit, or perhaps just the pressures of a fiercely competitive market, would stretch their precious flour further with less palatable additions. Chalk, finely ground plaster of Paris, even pulverized bone ash could find their way into the dough, silent, weighty secrets. Imagine biting into your daily bread, expecting that soft, yielding texture, the comforting give, only to encounter a gritty, almost sandy resistance between your teeth, a faint mineral taste. Potato flour was a common, relatively benign extender, but in the worst cases, even sawdust was kneaded in, adding bulk but nothing in the way of nourishment. Each slice then was another gamble, not just on its taste, which could be disappointingly bland or oddly chemical, but on what indigestible secrets its crumbly interior might conceal, slowly chipping away at health with every meal. Beyond the deceptive loaf, your quest for sustenance would likely lead you to the butcher's stalls, a stark and altogether more visceral assault on the senses. Forget the chilled, plastic-wrapped precision of today. Picture instead a heaving, open-air theater of flesh, great carcasses of beef and mutton, skinned and often only roughly butchered, would hang heavily from iron hooks, their surfaces glistening damply in the weak light. or perhaps under the full glare of the sun if you were in an uncovered market, exposed to every passing speck of dust and curious insect. The air itself would be thick, a potent cocktail, the coppery tang of fresh blood, the deeper, gamier scent of offal, and the faint, sickly sweet whisper of meat already beginning to turn. Swarms of fat, buzzing flies, bold and utterly unconcerned by your presence, would treat these displays as their personal feasting hall, a constant, shimmering black cloud against the ruddy backdrop of flesh. The rhythmic wet thud of cleavers meeting wood would echo through the narrow alleys, punctuated by the hoarse shouts of vendors hawking their wares. Wooden blocks, stained dark and worn smooth by countless chops, would be slick with gore, perhaps wiped down with a rag of questionable cleanliness. Sawdust, a common sight on the floor, wasn't there for rustic charm. It was there to soak up the relentless drips and spills, a temporary, fragrant mask for the unhygienic reality beneath. Refrigeration? A distant, almost fantastical dream for most. What you saw was what you got, often in various stages of maturity, shall we say. Choosing your dinner here wasn't just about selecting a cut. It was an act of faith, or perhaps sheer desperation. You'd point, haggle over pennies, and then carry your prize away, wrapped perhaps in a piece of greasy paper or even just a dock leaf, wondering just how fresh your fresh meat truly was, and what unseen microscopic passengers it might be carrying home with it. A protein source, certainly, but also, quite possibly, a source of profound, stomach-churning regret a few hours later. Beyond the immediate concerns of your gut, another, more insidious presence filled your every waking, and indeed sleeping, moment. The air itself. Forget the crisp, clean breezes you might imagine. Picture instead a thick, yellow-brown blanket, so dense it felt like you could almost chew it. This was the infamous London particular, a fog unlike any other, a suffocating miasma born of coal smoke and river damp. It clung to everything. Your clothes, your hair, the very brickwork of the buildings, staining them a grimy, soot black. And with this clinging fog came a sound, a constant, rasping symphony that echoed through every street, every alleyway, every cramped tenement. The cough, a dry, hacking sound, or a deep, chesty rattle. It was the city's unwelcome soundtrack, a testament to lungs battling a daily onslaught of airborne pollutants. Imagine breathing in air thick with coal smoke from countless chimneys, mingled with the acrid fumes of industry and the damp, earthy smell of the Thames. Each breath was a gamble, drawing in not just oxygen, but a cocktail of sulfur, soot, and unknown particles that would settle deep within you. The fog didn't just obscure vision, making navigating the streets a perilous adventure. It carried these irritants directly into the lungs of every man, woman, and child, a gritty film coating the inside of your throat with every inhale. That persistent cough, heard from behind closed doors and across bustling markets, wasn't just a minor ailment. It was a chronic affliction, a constant reminder of the very air they breathed being a slow, creeping adversary. A grim, percussive lullaby for a city struggling to breathe, day in, and most certainly, day out. That ever-present cough, echoing through the damp alleyways, was often more than just a consequence of the smoky air. For many, it was the first, insidious whisper of consumption, the disease we now know as tuberculosis. It hollowed you out from the inside, painting a delicate, almost ethereal flush on cheeks that grew steadily thinner, a romantic-sounding name for a merciless thief of breath and life. The thought of it was a constant, quiet dread, a shadow that fell over families huddled in cramped rooms where one person's cough could so easily become another's. Then there were the fevers that struck with terrifying speed. Imagine, just for a moment, the sudden, unwelcome heat that floods your body, not from a comforting hearth, but from an unseen enemy waging war within. This could be the onset of scarlet fever, its telltale rash spreading like a crimson tide, especially feared for the swiftness with which it could snatch away a child. Or perhaps it was the dreaded smallpox, a scourge that announced its arrival with rising pustules, a disfiguring terror that left its mark on so many if it didn't claim them entirely. The air, already heavy with the scent of coal smoke and damp, would then also carry the faint, sweetish, unsettling aroma of sickness from behind closed doors. Defenses against these invisible invaders were heartbreakingly few. Doctors, often well-meaning but armed with little more than theories, could offer scant comfort. Poultices might be applied, strange concoctions drunk, but real cures were the stuff of dreams. This gnawing vulnerability, this constant proximity to devastating illness, was simply a part of the fabric of daily life. It was a chilling lottery, where the prize was merely another day, free from the fever's fire or the wasting cough, a fragile piece in a world teeming with unseen threats. That chilling lottery indeed. And when your number came up, when that sweetish aroma of sickness clinging to the air was undeniably your own, the options were grimly limited. Perhaps a doctor would be summoned, his footsteps echoing with a hollow sort of authority. His bag, clinking softly, might contain a lancet, polished but rarely truly clean. For that raging fever, or indeed for almost any ailment, bloodletting was a common prescription. Imagine the cool, sharp sting as the blade broke your skin, followed by the slow, warm release of what little strength you had left, trickling into a waiting bowl. The faint, metallic scent might mingle with the odors of sickness already filling the room. The idea was to restore balance, to drain away the malevolent humors, but it often just drained away life itself. Or perhaps you'd endure a violent purge, a harsh emetic designed to expel the illness, but which felt more like expelling your very soul, leaving you hollowed out and trembling. And if the doctor's methods seemed too harsh or too expensive, there were always the patent medicines. Bottles with grand labels and even grander claims, promising cures for consumption, for nervousness, for female complaints. These concoctions, often brimming with alcohol, opium, or even more hazardous substances, offered a temporary deceptive comfort, a brief, muddled escape. It was a landscape of pain, hope, and profound misunderstanding, where true healing was a distant, almost unimaginable shore. So when the violent purges brought no relief, and the brightly labeled bottles of laudanum and gin offered only a fleeting, foggy peace, where else was there to turn? For many, the looming shadow of the hospital was the last, most desperate resort, a place whispered about with a mixture of dread and grim necessity. Try to picture it, if you will, as you contemplate your own failing strength. You wouldn't be met with gleaming corridors and quiet efficiency. Instead, imagine a scent that clings to the back of your throat. A complex, unsettling blend of unwashed bodies, stale sickness, the sharp, almost aggressive tang of carbolic acid attempting, and often failing to mask a deeper, more unsettling aroma of decay and despair. The wards themselves would be vast, echoing chambers, perhaps dimly lit by gas lamps that cast long, dancing shadows. They'd be crammed with rough wooden beds, set far too close together, each one a small island of suffering in a sea of it. The air, thick and heavy, would carry a constant, mournful symphony of soft coughs, turning into racking ones. The rustle of coarse, unchanged sheets, and the occasional, muffled groan that spoke volumes of untended pain. Surgeons, their aprons often stiff with the dried, brownish stains of previous encounters, moved with a grim purpose, their understanding of how infection truly spread still tragically incomplete. Surgical instruments, wiped perhaps on a rag, but rarely sterilized to any standard we would recognize, passed from one unfortunate soul to the next, carrying unseen dangers. It's no wonder, then, that these institutions were often seen not as havens of healing, but as places where one might contract hospital gangrene or erysipelas, or simply wait for the inevitable. The hospital was where hope went to quietly fade, a final shadowed doorway when all other paths had closed. And if you managed to avoid the perilous embrace of the hospital, other, more insidious ailments were always lurking, eager to claim their due. Consider for a moment the simple yet utterly debilitating agony of a toothache. In an era where sugar was becoming ever more popular and dental hygiene was a distant, misunderstood concept, a throbbing jaw was a depressingly common companion. It was a persistent, gnawing pain, one that could make the simplest pleasures, like a warm meal or a night's rest, an impossible dream, a fiery pulse drumming behind your eye. When that dull ache sharpened into an unbearable torment, where could you turn? There were no gleaming, sterile dental practices, no gentle promises of painless relief. Instead, you might find yourself directed to the local barber surgeon, his shop a curious and often unsettling mix of shaving soap scents, stray hair clippings, and the faint, metallic tang of old blood that never quite seemed to fade from the air. Or perhaps the village blacksmith, his forge still radiating a comforting warmth nearby, his powerful hands more accustomed to hammering unyielding iron than tending to delicate human mouths, would be your only, rather intimidating recourse. The cure was as brutal as the affliction. Imagine settling into a rough wooden chair, its surface smoothed by countless other sufferers, as the barber or smith selects a fearsome-looking pair of pliers, often well used, perhaps wiped on a leather apron if you were fortunate. There might be a hastily offered swig of gin or laudanum, a feeble attempt to dull your senses against the onslaught to come. Then, a powerful, often clumsy wrenching, the sickening crack of the tooth root, a sound that seemed to echo deep within your skull, followed by a surge of fiery pain that threatened to steal your breath. Then, one fervently hoped, by a profound if bloody and dizzying relief. This wasn't an isolated incident of misfortune. It was a pervasive, dull hum beneath the grand, clattering symphony of Victorian progress. For many, life was punctuated by such moments of raw, physical suffering, often accepted with a grim sort of stoicism born of necessity. The missing teeth, the swollen jaws, were just another part of the everyday landscape, a silent testament to an age where even a simple tooth could declare war on your peace, and the only truce was often a brutal, breathless surrender. Beyond the throbbing ache in your own jaw, another kind of unease permeated the streets. The thin veneer of public order, so easily shattered, was patrolled by men like the Peeler. Picture him, if you will, stepping out from the perpetual London gloom, one of Sir Robert Peel's relatively new policemen. His uniform, a dark blue swallowtail coat and a distinctive, sturdy top hat, was intended to project authority, a symbol of a more ordered world. Yet, in the sprawling, gaslit warrens of the city, he often appeared a solitary figure, an island of officialdom in a vast, swirling ocean of humanity. His beat was an assault on the senses, a cacophony that rarely subsided. The grinding rattle of cartwheels over uneven cobbles, the endless cries of street sellers, the sharp, acrid tang of coal smoke mixing with the damp, earthy smell of the Thames and something less identifiable, something of decay, always lingering in the air. He'd hear the low thrum of countless lives pressed close, the sudden, sharp exclamation of a quarrel, the hushed tones of transactions best left unseen, armed with little more than a wooden truncheon and a noisy rattle to summon help that might be slow to arrive or simply overwhelmed. He was a constant, quiet presence against a backdrop of often overwhelming need and desperation. These men were, in many ways, a bold experiment, a tentative hand reaching out to steady a world that seemed perpetually on the brink of tumbling into chaos. Their mere existence was a fragile promise of safety, a promise they struggled, often against impossible odds, to keep. And yet, that fragile promise of safety, offered by those early bobbies, often felt gossamer thin, especially as you yourself navigated the teeming thoroughfares. Picture it. You're threading your way through those crowded streets, a living river of faces, each etched with its own story. The air is thick with the rumble of iron-shod wheels on unforgiving cobblestones, the sharp cries of unseen street vendors, and the constant overlapping murmur of 1,000 hushed or hurried conversations. Amidst this overwhelming sensory tapestry, another, more insidious awareness would prickle at the back of your mind. The constant, gnawing anxiety about your pockets, your purse, any small precious possession you dared to carry. The artful dodgers, the nimble-fingered children hardened by necessity, and the gaunt, desperate adults were all too often masters of their grim craft. A slight, almost imperceptible jostle in the dense crowd, a seemingly accidental bump from a passerby, a moment of distraction cleverly orchestrated by a pair working in tandem, and your treasured watch chain might feel suddenly, unnervingly lighter. Your silk handkerchief, a small comfort, could vanish as if by magic. Your few hard-earned coins spirited away. You'd find yourself instinctively clutching your belongings a little tighter, your gaze perhaps darting with a flicker of suspicion at any who lingered too close, too long. It wasn't just about the monetary loss, though that in itself could be ruinous for many. It was the subtle violation, the unsettling knowledge that unseen eyes were constantly assessing you, weighing your vulnerability against their own pressing need. This low hum of vigilance, this quiet tension, was simply part of the daily soundtrack of London life, an unspoken agreement that you were, to some extent, always on guard. But as daylight finally surrendered to the encroaching dusk, that daytime vigilance transformed into something far more acute, a prickling sense of unease that settled deep in your bones. Imagine, if you will, stepping out into the London night, not the brightly lit thoroughfares you might picture from period dramas, but the labyrinthine embrace of an unlit alleyway. The air grows colder here, heavy with the scent of damp brick, stale beer seeping from a nearby public house, and the ever-present cloying aroma of coal smoke that clings to everything, even your own clothes. Your only guide might be the faintest glimmer from a distant, sputtering gas lamp, casting long, dancing shadows that transform familiar shapes into lurking threats. Each footfall on the slick, uneven cobbles echoes unnervingly. Was that the rustle of rags? Or something larger, something breathing, just beyond the reach of the feeble light? The silence between the distant city din feels heavy, charged with unspoken possibilities. Down these narrow passages in notorious slums like Seven Dials or the Old Nicole, the darkness was a cloak for all manner of desperate acts. You'd find your pace quickening, not quite a run, but a purposeful stride, every sense straining to interpret the sounds. A distant, drunken shout, the almost silent scuttling of unseen creatures, the mournful creak of a loose shutter in the wind. It wasn't just the tangible fear of a footpad emerging from a black doorway, his face a mere smudge in the gloom, but a deeper, more primal unease, the kind of fear that gnaws at the edges of your resolve, where the darkness itself seemed to breathe, and every misshapen shadow could be a lurking phantom from a penny dreadful, or worse, the stark embodiment of human desperation. In such places, shadows weren't merely an absence of light. They felt like active, watchful presences in the nightly drama of survival. The city's harshness wasn't confined to its darkened alleyways, nor to the dead of night. Daylight, too, could unveil its own peculiar brand of chilling spectacle, far removed from the quiet dread of a midnight encounter. Imagine, if you will, being swept along by a tide of expectant humanity, not towards a place of work or gentle leisure, but towards a public square. The air, thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale beer, cheap gin, and strangely, the sweet aroma of hot pies being hawked by opportunistic vendors, hums with a grim, almost festive energy. At the center of it all, stark and unyielding against the often gray London sky, stands the gallows, perhaps newly erected, its raw timber a fresh wound in the cityscape. It's a crude stage for the ultimate, irreversible drama, and the crowd presses in, a heaving, jostling mass craning their necks. They are a sea of faces, some openly curious, others hardened, all eager for the grim performance. Children might be perched on their father's shoulders, their wide, innocent eyes taking in a scene that would, for us, be the very fabric of nightmares. This wasn't just punishment. It was a brutal lesson, a stark warning, and for many, a truly riveting, if profoundly ghastly form of popular entertainment. The condemned, a pale, trembling figure whose crime might have been born of sheer desperation, stealing a loaf of bread perhaps, or a few meager shillings, becomes the unwilling star. The collective silence that descends just moments before the end, a sudden breathless hush blanketing thousands, is perhaps more unnerving than any shout or jeer. It's a vacuum of sound, heavy with anticipation, just before the awful, final mechanics of the state play out. This was the raw, unfiltered display of the law's ultimate power, a stark reminder of how precariously life could be balanced, and how publicly, how casually, its brutal extinguishing could be witnessed. One wonders how many such sights it would take before the horror dulled, before the spectacle became just another Tuesday morning's diversion, another grim landmark in the sprawling, unforgiving city. From the sharp public shock of the gallows, we drift to another, more pervasive fear that haunted the Victorian city dweller, the creeping dread of the workhouse. It loomed, a grim brick sentinel, often the largest building in a parish, a constant, visible reminder. It wasn't just a place of last resort. It was the very embodiment of destitution, a name whispered about in hushed, anxious tones, a social abyss. To find yourself knocking at its heavy, unyielding door was to admit absolute defeat, to have every last shred of independence, every comfort, meticulously stripped away. Imagine, for a moment, stepping across that unforgiving threshold. The air inside feels instantly colder, heavy with the scent of carbolic soap, a harsh chemical tang doing its best, and failing, to mask the underlying notes of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and a profound, lingering despair. Cold, echoing corridors stretch before you, the stone floors unforgiving beneath thin shoes, the walls painted a drab, spirit-sapping gray, absorbing all warmth, all hope. You would be separated from your family, husbands from wives, children from parents, a deliberate tearing apart of familiar bonds. Your own clothes, a last link to your former self, would be taken, replaced by a rough, shapeless uniform, instantly marking you as an inmate. Your name, too, might feel less your own, perhaps even supplanted by a number in the grand impersonal machinery of institutional poverty. Days would then stretch into an almost unbearable eternity of monotonous, often utterly pointless labor. Picture the endless, mind-numbing task of picking oakum, teasing apart old, tarred ropes until your fingers were raw and bleeding, or the back-breaking work of crushing stones, all for the reward of meager rations, thin, watery gruel, a hunk of dry bread, perhaps a sliver of cheese if you were fortunate. It was a life deliberately engineered to be less appealing than the most miserable existence outside its walls, a stark, grinding deterrent. This wasn't charity as we might imagine it. It was a chilling, public lesson in the consequences of poverty. Your own supposed failure, etched into every cold stone, every echoing footfall. Beyond the workhouse, those chilling lessons and consequence echoed through every street and alley of Victorian London, for society itself was built upon unseen, yet unyielding, walls of class. These divisions were as real and defining as the grimy brickwork of the buildings. Imagine, for a moment, you are walking those streets. Your very clothes, the rough mended fabric of your coat, perhaps, or the surprisingly clean but clearly second-hand dress, would instantly signal your station to any passerby. The dirt beneath your fingernails, or the conspicuous lack thereof, the weariness in your posture, or the upright confidence of a life unburdened by physical toil. These were your silent introductions, broadcasting your place before you even uttered a word. And your words, when you spoke them, would be another immediate marker. The crisp, educated tones of the upper echelons, with their carefully chosen vocabulary, were a world away from the myriad dialects, the dropped H's, and the earthy colloquialisms that marked the speech of the working poor. These weren't just superficial differences of accent or attire. They were barriers as solid and formidable as any stone wall. They dictated where you could live, often confining you to overcrowded tenements in one part of town, while others enjoyed spacious homes in another. They governed whom you could speak to with any degree of familiarity, and precisely how. You wouldn't simply strike up a casual conversation with someone perceived to be from a markedly different class. The invisible lines were too clearly drawn, the social chasm too wide to bridge without arousing suspicion, disdain, or at the very least, an awkward, dismissive silence. Opportunity, that elusive key to a better life, wasn't something you generally earned through sheer grit or talent alone. it was largely something you were born into, or cruelly born without. It was a silent, pervasive script handed to you at your first breath, detailing the narrow pathways your life was expected to follow. And that silent script, the one dictating your station, extended far beyond the grimy workshop or the grand estate. It wove itself into the very air you breathed, especially if you found yourself, by some strange twist of fate, attempting to navigate a polite Victorian drawing room. Imagine stepping across the threshold, the scent of beeswax and old roses faintly in the air, mingled perhaps with the faintest whiff of coal smoke clinging to the heavy velvet curtains. Here, the rules weren't just unspoken, they were practically invisible to an outsider like you, yet as rigidly enforced as any law. Which gloved hand do you offer, if any? To whom do you bow, and how deeply? The simple act of conversation was a dance with steps you'd never learned. A misplaced pleasantry, an opinion voiced too boldly, even the cut of your doubtless anachronistic coat could send ripples of silent disapproval across the room. It wasn't necessarily about outright hostility, not always, more a subtle cooling of the atmosphere. A polite but firm exclusion, as if you'd unwittingly revealed yourself to be speaking an entirely different and rather distasteful language. The intricate ballet of calling cards alone, with their folded corners and specific times for delivery, could determine your social standing for months. One wrong move, one innocent breach of a code you couldn't even see, and doors would quietly close. Opportunities, friendships, even simple acceptance, all could vanish, not with a bang, but with the rustle of a silk dress turning away, or the almost imperceptible arch of a well-bred eyebrow. It was a constant, exhausting vigilance, this tiptoeing through a minefield of manners, where every gesture was weighed, every word scrutinized. Beyond the silent judgment of a misplaced calling card, beyond the exhausting dance of social etiquette, lay another, more immediate barrier, the sound of London itself. Imagine, for a moment, stepping out from a quiet, perfectly ordered drawing room into the vibrant chaos of a London street, and attempting to navigate not just the crowds, but the conversations. The air thrums with 1,000 voices, a symphony of incomprehensible chatter that makes your own tongue feel thick and alien in your mouth. You try to ask for directions, perhaps to a landmark you've read about, but the response is a bewildering cascade of unfamiliar vowels and clipped consonants, words tumbling out in rhythms you can't quite catch. A phrase that sounds like an insult might just be a cheerful, if indecipherable, greeting from a passing costermonger. An offer of help could be buried in a dialect so thick, so rich with unknown localisms, that it feels like a physical barrier between you and understanding. Even a simple transaction at a market stall risks becoming an awkward pantomime, your polite inquiries met with blank stares, or a string of rapid-fire slang that leaves you nodding dumbly, utterly lost. It's not just the colorful cant of the underworld, though that certainly existed, a secret language whispered in shadowy alleyways. It's the sheer, overwhelming variety of accents, from the precise, sometimes cutting, tones of the upper classes to the rich, earthy dialects of those newly arrived from distant shires or from across the Irish Sea. Each neighborhood, each crowded pub, each bustling market seemed to hum with its own distinct linguistic code. That profound sense of miscommunication, of being unable to make even the simplest connection, would wrap around you like a damp, gray London fog, isolating you completely in a city teeming with unheard voices. And if this city of bewildering sounds already feels isolating, imagine now that you are a woman navigating its streets, its expectations. Your world, even amidst this sprawling metropolis, shrinks dramatically. Before you even consider stepping outside, there's the ritual of dress. A cage of whalebone and steel, the corset, cinching your breath, reshaping your very form. Layer upon layer of heavy fabric follows, rustling with every constrained step, a constant reminder of propriety and immobility, the weight of expectation made tangible upon your shoulders. Moving through the city isn't a simple affair, a casual stroll to observe its wonders. Unchaperoned? In many circles, simply unthinkable, a whisper of scandal waiting to happen. Your sphere is largely domestic, the quiet hum of the household, the carefully tended garden if you were fortunate, or perhaps carefully selected, respectable public spaces, like a sedate park or a specific type of shop. The bustling, raucous heart of London, the places where decisions were made, where industries roared with fiery breath and masculine endeavor. These were often landscapes viewed from a carriage window, or merely imagined from drawing room tales. What of your voice, your ambitions, those sparks of individuality? The professions open to you are strikingly few, often little more than extensions of that domestic role. A governess, shaping young minds within prescribed limits. A seamstress, her fingers raw from endless stitching. Or perhaps the grinding, anonymous labor of a factory, if grim necessity dictated. To speak out with authority, to challenge prevailing thought, to simply be truly heard in the public square. These were aspirations often met with a wall of polite dismissal, or worse, open ridicule. Your thoughts, your keenly felt experiences, largely unrecorded by the formal histories written by men, become another poignant layer of those unheard voices, lost in the great indifferent rumble of the Victorian age. It's a quieter kind of suffocation, perhaps, veiled in lace and propriety, but no less profound in its limitations. And if the voices of women were muffled by layers of expectation and societal constraint, what then of the children, those smaller figures navigating a world designed by and for adults? For them, the silence was not just expected, it was often a rule, etched into the very fabric of their upbringing, a heavy cloak they were made to wear. The old adage, "children should be seen and not heard," wasn't some quaint, forgotten saying. It was a stern, practical guide to daily life, a constant reminder of their subordinate place. Imagine, for a moment, shrinking down, your perspective shifting to that of a child in a grand, if somewhat gloomy Victorian parlor. The air is cool, still, carrying the faint, clean scent of beeswax from polished furniture, perhaps mingling with the slightly musty aroma of heavy drapes that block out much of the sun. You sit on a hard, unyielding chair, your feet likely not even touching the floorboards, which themselves might feel cold beneath thin stockings. Your world is one of rigid schedules and unwavering, unquestioning obedience. A stray giggle, a question asked out of turn, even an untidy shoelace, could draw a swift, chilling glance from a nearby adult, a sharp word that cuts the air. Or worse, the looming threat of more tangible discipline, quietly understood and ever present. The soft comforts and boisterous freedoms of a modern childhood, the brightly colored toys strewn carelessly across a room, the patient answers to endless curious questions, the gentle encouragement of messy, joyful self-expression. These are luxuries you could scarcely conjure in your mind. Instead, your small hands might be kept perpetually busy with mind-numbing rote tasks, perhaps intricate needlework even for tiny, clumsy fingers, or your mind channeled into reciting lessons by heart, with little room left for the natural, vibrant flights of fancy that should animate a child's spirit. Play, when permitted at all, was often structured, purposeful, and certainly not to be too loud, too free. It's a stark, quiet existence, a childhood lived under the constant, low hum of adult authority, where even your dreams might feel as if they ought to be orderly and subdued. But even the most regimented life, the most subdued spirit, could be utterly undone by the city itself, by the very air you breathed. Imagine waking one morning, not to the pale gray light of a typical London dawn, but to an oppressive mustard yellow gloom pressing insistently against your window pane, thick as treacle. This wasn't merely mist, a gentle morning haze. This was the infamous pea souper, a true London particular, a suffocating brew concocted by nature and human endeavor. It would seep insidiously under doorways, through even the tightest window cracks, carrying with it the acrid, sulphurous tang of a million coal fires, the metallic breath of burgeoning industry, and a damp, earthy chill that settled deep in your bones, a cold that no amount of shivering could dispel. Venturing out into this unnatural twilight was to step into a disorienting nightmare. The world would shrink to a claustrophobic bubble just a few feet around you, familiar street corners transforming into alien, threatening landscapes. The usual cacophony of the city would become a symphony of muffled, distorted sounds. A distant, desperate shout, the unseen, ghostly clatter of a horse-drawn cart, the incessant, racking coughs of fellow pedestrians materializing briefly from the dense veil. You'd feel the fine grit of it coating your tongue, the stinging burn in your throat and eyes as they watered uselessly. Each breath would be a conscious heavy labor, drawing in not sustenance but a choking miasma that stank of soot and damp decay. For many, especially the old or frail, a walk in the fog was their last. Lost in the swirling murk or simply succumbing to lungs already strained, the fog became a silent, indifferent thief of breath. And if the air itself offered little comfort, the city's great artery, the River Thames, promised a different kind of assault on the senses. Forget any picturesque notions of gently flowing water reflecting the sky. As you drew nearer, the reality would be far grimmer. Imagine approaching not a sparkling ribbon of water, but something more akin to a sluggish, impossibly dark current, thick with the city's refuse. The smell, an olfactory punch, would likely hit you long before the river came into full view. This wasn't a simple, earthy riverbank scent. It was a complex, stomach-turning perfume, a potent brew of raw sewage from countless overflowing cesspits, industrial chemicals from tanneries and factories, and the general detritus of a sprawling metropolis. Look closely, and you might see bloated carcasses of unfortunate animals, rotting vegetables, and all manner of unmentionable contributions bobbing gently on its surface, a grim, ever-shifting tapestry of waste. During the infamous summer of 1858, this festering horror gave rise to the Great Stink, an event so overpowering that sheets soaked in chloride of lime were hung over the windows of Parliament, a desperate and largely futile attempt to keep the miasma at bay. This wasn't merely an inconvenience. It was the lifeblood of London transformed into a vast, open sewer, a constant, oppressive presence. The Thames, far from being a source of pride, had become a true river of sorrows, its tainted waters a daily testament to the city's desperate struggle. And this struggle with decay wasn't confined to the Thames. Above ground, even in the places consecrated for eternal rest, London was quite literally overflowing. The city's graveyards, small parish churchyards nestled between tightly packed tenements and bustling streets, were full to bursting, and then some. Generations had been laid to rest in the same patches of earth, until rest was a very optimistic term indeed. The sheer volume of the departed meant that plots were reused with alarming frequency, disturbing those who had gone before. Coffins were stacked, sometimes just inches beneath the churned, dark soil, their wooden lids often splintering under the pressure from above, or from the grim work of those making space for new arrivals. The ground itself, saturated and sour, could swell and shift with the gases of decomposition, a slow, macabre exhalation. Imagine, if you will, living beside such a place, where the familiar scent of your daily life, the coal smoke, the street food, the damp wool, was perpetually overlaid with a faint, cloyingly sweet, and unmistakably funereal odor seeping through your very walls. Children, perhaps unknowingly, played in alleys just a stone's throw away, their laughter a stark, fragile counterpoint to the silent, overcrowded cities of the dead beneath their feet. This wasn't merely an aesthetic or spiritual offense, it was a palpable threat to public health, a grim counterpart to the river's pollution. Leachate from these saturated burial grounds, thick with the byproducts of decay, inevitably seeped into nearby wells and the damp earth of basement dwellings, carrying untold sickness with it. The miasma theory, that pervasive belief that bad air, the effluvia from such places, caused disease, found potent, horrifying fuel here. These graveyards, far from being peaceful sanctuaries, became sources of pervasive dread, a constant, visible, and smellable testament to the thin, porous veil between life and death in the Victorian metropolis. And if the earth itself offered no true solace, no clean break from the cycle of decay, then the very air you breathed was hardly a refuge. Progress in Victorian London had a very distinct and often choking scent. Imagine, for a moment, stepping out from a cramped tenement, your lungs already heavy from the close air within, only to be met by a sky perpetually bruised. Towering brick chimneys, the proud heralds of industry, spewed an endless torrent of black, greasy smoke, a constant, gritty rain that settled on every surface, coating your skin, your clothes, the very food you might try to eat. The air itself often tasted metallic, acrid, a cocktail of coal dust, sulfur, and a dozen other unidentifiable, unsettling chemical whispers from dye works, tanneries, and countless small workshops, all releasing their waste with a casual, unthinking freedom. This was the atmosphere of innovation, the breath of the workshop of the world. And what of the water, the vital Thames that snaked through the city's heart? The same factories and workshops that painted the sky with their fumes treated the rivers, the canals, and even the groundwater as convenient, infinite drains. Dyes in vibrant, unnatural hues would streak the Thames, joining the sewage and the effluvia from those overflowing graveyards we just spoke of. Chemical waste, acids and alkalis all mingled freely, creating a toxic brew that shimmered with an oily sheen under the weak sunlight. It wasn't just an aesthetic blight. It was the lifeblood of the city, poisoned at its source. This was the environment where, quote, progress was forged. A relentless churning machine that, while building an empire, seemed determined to slowly suffocate its own heart. And in that suffocating embrace, another, quieter kind of starvation took hold. A profound hunger for green. Imagine, if you will, your world, day in and day out. A relentless panorama of gray and brown, soot-stained brick stretching as far as the eye could see, cobbled streets slick with unmentionable grime, and a sky so often veiled by a perpetual twilight of smoke that a glimpse of clear blue was an event. For many, especially the poor, the very idea of accessible green space, a place for quiet solace or a simple breath of fresher air, was a distant, almost mythical concept. A simple patch of grass, the sight of a tree that wasn't stunted and struggling for life in a tiny forgotten square. These were profound luxuries. The scent of damp earth, of fresh leaves, of blossom on the breeze. These were sensations almost entirely alien to the cramped courts and narrow alleyways where the vast majority of the city's immense population was densely packed. The grand manicured parks that London did possess, like Hyde Park or Regent's Park, might as well have been on another planet for a family crammed into a single damp room in Whitechapel or Bethnal Green. They existed, certainly, symbols of civic pride or aristocratic leisure, but they were not woven into the fabric of daily life for those who toiled endlessly in factories and workshops. This wasn't just an aesthetic deprivation, a mere lack of prettiness. It was a deep, gnawing absence. A longing for a horizon not entirely consumed by chimneys and rooftops, for a whisper of the natural world in an environment relentlessly shaped by human industry, and often, human suffering. This deep craving for nature, for a simple connection to something growing and alive, was a constant unspoken ache in the heart of the Victorian city. That deep craving for nature, for a simple connection to something growing and alive, was a constant, unspoken ache in the heart of the Victorian city. But as the last slivers of daylight surrender to the encroaching gloom, that ache might be overshadowed by a far more pressing need: shelter. The gas lamps flicker to life, casting long, wavering shadows that twist familiar streets into something more menacing. The air, already thick with the day's grime and coal smoke, now carries a damp chill, a smell of wet wool, stale beer, and the indefinable scent of a city settling uneasily for the night. This is the hour when the quest for a safe or at least affordable place to rest becomes paramount. A desperate scramble in a world where a roof over your head was a fiercely contested prize. Imagine trying to find your spot. Perhaps you'd seek out a common lodging house, if you could spare the coppers. Picture the scene: a low-ceilinged room, dimly lit, the air heavy with the breath of dozens, the smell of unwashed bodies, damp clothing, and cheap gin. You might find a space on a shared wooden plank, or, if you were particularly unlucky, just a patch of greasy floor. The sounds would be a symphony of human misery: coughing, snoring, muttering, the occasional sob cutting through the drone. Privacy was a forgotten word. Security? A dangerous gamble. Your neighbors for the night could be anyone, from an exhausted laborer to someone looking to lighten your pockets while you slept. Even the infamous penny sit-up or two-penny hangover, where you paid to sleep sitting on a bench or leaning over a rope, offered a grim testament to how precious and how precarious basic shelter truly was. Finding a place to simply close your eyes without fear was, for many, the hardest battle of the day. But let's imagine, just for a moment, that you've managed to secure something more permanent, something with four walls and perhaps even a door that latches. You step into what is called home, a single room in a towering, soot-stained tenement. The air hits you first, a thick, cloying blanket woven from the smells of unwashed bodies, stale cooking, damp wool, and the ever-present undercurrent of coal smoke seeping in from every crack and crevice. It's a fragrance that clings to your clothes, your hair, a constant reminder of where you are. Look around. This isn't just your room. It's the living space, the kitchen, the bedroom for an entire family. Perhaps you, a spouse, and several children, all existing within these few square feet. A battered table might hold a chipped jug and a few meager provisions. In one corner, a pile of rags and straw serves as the communal bed, a lumpy landscape where bodies will later huddle together for warmth, sharing coughs and whispered dreams. The light, if any, filters weakly through a grimy window pane, illuminating dust motes dancing in the gloom like tiny, indifferent stars. Every act of life unfolds here, stripped bare of privacy. Children play amidst the laundry drying overhead, their laughter punctuated by the sizzle of whatever meager meal is being prepared on a tiny, smoking grate. Arguments flare and subside in the same confined air. Sickness, when it comes, as it so often does, is a shared experience, its progress watched by every member of the household, its breath felt by those sleeping inches away. There's no quiet corner to retreat to, no escape from the constant, wearying presence of others. Beyond the confines of that shared breath, another presence flickers constantly, a restless orange eye in every dwelling, the open flame. It's there in the greasy sputter of a tallow candle on a rickety table, its wavering light making shadows dance like phantoms on the grimy walls. You'd smell its smoky perfume, a constant reminder of its hunger, mingling with the scent of damp wool and unwashed bodies. Downstairs, or perilously close in an adjoining tenement, the cooking fire or the heating grate breathes a hotter, more insistent life. Its core, a dull, hungry red. These little pockets of combustion are indispensable, pushing back the relentless London dark, warding off the bone-deep chill that seeps from the flagstone floors and through the thin, often wooden, walls. But they are cradled by a city built of kindling, aged timber beams dry as dust. Furniture, often simple pine, quick to catch, layers of old wallpaper, cheap fabrics used for curtains or bedding, all parched and ready. Even the air itself can feel thick with coal dust, an invisible flammable powder hanging in suspension, waiting for a careless moment. Imagine the sound of a stray spark meeting dry wood, a tiny, insidious crackle, almost unheard in the general din, but the seed of devastation. In these densely packed warrens, where one building leans wearily against the next, fire doesn't just consume, it leaps, it gallops, a terrifying crimson tide sweeping through the narrow alleyways. The cry of fire would cut through the night, a sound far more chilling than any ghostly whisper, promising a frantic scramble, the acrid taste of panic in your throat, and the potential loss of everything in a roaring, incandescent furnace. Sleep under such a constant flickering threat must have been a fragile thing indeed. And even if the flames spared you, the night itself held its own quiet menace, a darkness far deeper than any you've likely known. As dusk bled into true night over the sprawling city, London wouldn't simply dim. It would be swallowed by an immense, almost tangible blackness. Forget the ambient glow of modern life. Here, darkness was a presence. Imagine yourself in a typical cramped room, lit perhaps by a single sputtering tallow candle. Its greasy, weak light would push back the shadows only a few hesitant feet, making the corners of the room dance with grotesque, shifting shapes. while the air might carry the faint, unsettling scent of cheap animal fat burning, or the metallic tang of a poorly trimmed oil lamp, offering little real comfort against the encroaching gloom that pressed in from the grimy window panes. Venturing outside into this nocturnal landscape, if you truly had to, was an entirely different, more perilous prospect. The much-vaunted gas lamps, where they existed at all, were often spaced far apart, their weak, yellowish glow creating isolated pools of comparative safety in an ocean of unlit streets and menacing alleyways. These weren't the bright, even illuminations we take for granted. This was a piecemeal, flickering defense against a darkness that felt ancient, heavy, and absolute. Each unlit doorway, each narrow, winding passage, became a canvas for your deepest anxieties. Every rustle in the shadows, every distant, muffled footfall, amplified by the oppressive silence in the unseen, could signal a potential threat. You'd find yourself moving slowly, senses straining, the damp chill of the London night seeping into your bones, never quite sure what or who the next patch of impenetrable shadow might conceal. This constant, low-level vigilance, the sheer, exhausting effort of navigating a world half-seen, would surely wear you down, making true, untroubled rest a luxury few could genuinely afford. And even if you did find a place to lay your head, to escape the shadowy uncertainties of the streets, that untroubled rest would likely remain elusive, even within your own meager lodgings. For the night held other companions, far less welcome than the darkness itself. Your bed, if you were among the city's teeming poor, might be a thin straw pallet on a cold, damp floor, or perhaps a shared space, warm with the bodies of strangers. But you wouldn't be alone. Not truly, not even for a moment. The faint, persistent rustling you'd hear wouldn't just be the straw settling beneath you. It would be the almost confident skittering of mice, grown bold in their endless search for scraps, or perhaps the more substantial, unwelcome shuffle of a rat exploring its nightly domain. Fleas, of course, were a given, tiny, unseen tyrants feasting in the dark, leaving trails of maddeningly itchy, inflamed bites across your skin by morning. And then there were the lice, clinging to hair and threadbare fabric, a constant, irritating presence that spoke volumes about the close quarters and the scarcity of clean water. This wasn't an occasional nuisance to be swatted away. For a vast swath of London's population, this was the nightly norm, an accepted, if resented, part of existence. You might try to brush them away in your sleep, to find a momentarily cleaner spot on the palette, but they were as much a part of the London air as the ever-present coal smoke. Imagine that feeling, the constant, low-level awareness of infestation, the almost imperceptible tickle or movement against your skin as you desperately tried to drift into oblivion. Sleep, in such intimate and unwelcome company, would be a fitful, interrupted affair, a brief respite rather than a deep restoration, leaving you almost certainly ill-prepared for the trials of another London day. And if the nightly skirmish with unseen bedfellows left you weary, the dawn in Victorian London offered no true reprieve. It merely shifted the nature of the assault, because beyond the visible grime, beyond the crawling things, lay an even more insidious threat, a silent, invisible gauntlet you'd be forced to run with every breath, every sip, every bite. The germs. The very air you'd inhale, already thick with the remembered scent of coal smoke, would carry a far more personal, microscopic cargo. Particles of dried animal waste from the cobbled streets, coughed-up droplets teeming with the ancestors of tuberculosis, bacteria wafting from the overflowing cesspits in nearby basements, all mingled into an invisible miasma. The famous pea super fogs, romanticized in fiction, weren't just condensed water. They were a perfect, clinging suspension medium for these unseen assailants, bringing them right to your lungs. And the water, oh, the water. That life-giving necessity, drawn from a pump down the street, or perhaps, if you were unlucky, directly from a cistern catching the city's grime, was often a murky harbinger of swift, violent illness. The Thames, London's grand river, served as its primary, open sewer, a swirling, gray-brown cocktail of industrial effluent, slaughterhouse runoff, and the daily waste of millions. Each gulp, however cautiously taken, would be a gamble. Imagine, then, your modern immune system, so carefully shielded by decades of sanitation, by filtered water and food regulations, suddenly plunged into this microbial soup. It would be like a highly sophisticated but utterly cloistered scholar suddenly thrust onto a battlefield teeming with unknown foes. Accustomed to identifying and neutralizing the occasional, relatively tame invader, your body's defenses would now face a relentless, overwhelming tide of pathogens it had likely never encountered. Virulent strains of cholera, typhoid, dysentery, scarlet fever, all jostling for purchase. Within hours, perhaps even minutes of your arrival, your body, unseasoned by this constant grimy warfare, would likely begin to falter. That subtle tickle in your throat, the slight unease in your stomach, these could be the first quiet signals of a system utterly overwhelmed. It wasn't necessarily that Victorians were inherently tougher. It was that their environment had already waged a long, brutal selective war on their populations from birth. For you, a visitor from a cleaner, quieter age, it would almost certainly be a shockingly swift defeat, a quiet surrender to the unseen world that truly ruled the Victorian city. Beyond the invisible siege of pathogens we just imagined, the city would begin to wage a more overt war upon your very frame, a relentless physical attrition for which you are utterly unprepared. Consider your feet, for instance. Soft, perhaps, accustomed to supportive soles and smooth, even pavements. In Victorian London, the very ground beneath you would be an antagonist. Uneven, slick cobblestones, often glistening with unmentionable slime, or the sucking mud of unpaved alleys. You would walk for miles, not as a choice for exercise, but as a basic necessity. Your shoes, if you were fortunate enough to have sturdy ones, offering little protection against the constant jarring impact. Before long, a dull ache would begin its insidious creep, from your arches up through your calves, a persistent complaint from muscles unaccustomed to such relentless demands. And this is merely from walking. Imagine, then, the energy required for even the simplest of daily chores. Carrying water, not from a convenient tap, but hauled in heavy buckets, perhaps up several flights of dark, narrow stairs, the rough wood of the handle digging into your palms. Or lugging coal or wood through crowded, chaotic streets, just to ward off the ever-present chill that seemed to seep from the very stones of the city. Each task, a small battle against gravity and your own flagging strength. Our modern bodies, so often cradled by ergonomic chairs and whisked along by engines, are simply not conditioned for this ceaseless, grinding effort. The strain wouldn't be a sudden shock, but a slow, cumulative exhaustion, settling deep into your bones like the damp London fog, leaving you weary beyond measure well before the day had even properly drawn to a close. But even if your body somehow withstood the relentless physical demands, there's another, more insidious burden settling upon you. A weight not in your limbs, but squarely on your mind. A constant, wearying companion. Imagine walking those cobbled streets, not with the idle curiosity of a tourist, but with a thrumming, almost animalistic alertness. Every passing stranger must be assessed. Friend, foe, or simply indifferent. Their eyes, their hands, the way they carry themselves, all subtle clues in a world where a moment's lapse could mean disaster. That nimble-fingered pickpocket is always a possibility. Their touch light as a feather, your meager earnings gone in an instant. The very environment breathes quiet menace. Every shadow in a dimly lit alley could conceal danger. Every fetid puddle, shimmering with unknown liquids, isn't just an obstacle, but a potential source of cholera or typhoid. Diseases that could sweep through a crowded tenement like a malevolent, invisible whisper. The air itself, thick with the smells of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and the often dubious tang of street food, would carry not just odors, but an undercurrent of pervasive threat. You'd learn to listen differently, too, to the changing cadence of footsteps behind you, the sudden hush in a crowded market, the distant mournful cry of a rag-and-bone man. There's no dialing emergency services here, no comforting thought of a well-stocked pharmacy or a social welfare system to catch you if you fall desperately ill or lose your meager earnings. The gnawing anxiety of destitution, the palpable fear of the dreaded workhouse looming like a stone specter, or worse, an unmarked pauper's grave, would be a constant, unwelcome companion. This isn't the fleeting stress of a missed deadline or a traffic jam. It's a primal, relentless vigilance, a quiet hum of ever-present dread beneath every thought, every interaction. How long do you think, before that unceasing tension etched itself permanently onto your spirit, long after the day was supposedly done? And as that dread settles deep within your bones, another, more immediate confusion begins to bloom. Imagine yourself there, plucked from your world of instant information and deposited onto a grimy cobblestone street. Your phone, that sleek portal to maps and knowledge, is just a useless sliver of glass and metal in your pocket. The symphony of the city, the clatter of iron-shod wheels, the unintelligible cries of street vendors, the distant, mournful bellow of a foghorn from the Thames, it's all a disorienting wave. Every street looks like a poorly lit, vaguely threatening twin of the last. Thirst, a simple primal need, would soon make itself known. But where would you even begin to look for water that wouldn't invite a swift and agonizing illness? There are no convenient taps, no bottled water glistening invitingly in a chilled cabinet. You might see a communal pump, perhaps, its handle worn smooth by countless desperate hands. The water itself a murky, suspicious offering, smelling faintly of the river's less savory contributions. Or perhaps a water seller, his barrel of questionable origin, his cry of "fresh water," sounding more like a gamble than a guarantee in the soot-tinged air. Hunger, too, would gnaw. But navigating the makeshift stalls and dimly lit shops for something safe to eat would be a terrifying lottery. That pie, golden and steaming from a street vendor's cart, what lurks beneath its surprisingly cheap crust? Is that fresh meat truly fresh, or something far more sinister, artfully disguised with spices to mask its age or origin? There are no labels detailing ingredients, no sell-by dates, no reassuring hygiene ratings plastered on a window. Your modern sensibilities, your trained eye for quality, would be utterly useless against the backdrop of desperate commerce and widespread, ingenious adulteration. And should you need to find a specific place, a landmark, a potential source of aid, even just the way back to somewhere you vaguely recognized, how would you ask? The dialect alone might be a barrier, thick and unfamiliar to your ear. The city itself, a sprawling, smog-choked labyrinth of tangled alleys and anonymous courts, offers few familiar cues. Without your digital compass, without the clear grid of a modern map, you are adrift, a truly lost soul in a sea of indifferent, jostling humanity. The simple act of getting from one place to another becomes an expedition fraught with uncertainty, and the gnawing realization that you truly don't know how to survive here, not even for a single bewildering day. The feeling of being utterly adrift is just the beginning, a cold surface realization. Beneath it lies a deeper, more chilling truth. You're not just lost in place, but in time, stripped bare of all the invisible shields that guard your modern life. Think of it, just for a moment. That small scrape on your hand from brushing against a rough brick wall? Today, a fleeting nuisance. But here, in this London, without the potent magic of antibiotics, it's a ticking clock. You'd watch, perhaps with a growing, quiet dread, as the redness spread, as the heat bloomed from the wound, a sinister flower of infection unfurling beneath your skin. And if that infection truly took hold, if fever began to cloud your thoughts and sap your strength, where would you turn? There's no dialing for an ambulance, no swift journey to a gleaming emergency room staffed with calm professionals. Perhaps a parish doctor, if you could find one. If you somehow possessed the few precious pennies required for such a consultation, more likely you'd be left to the dubious, well-meaning, but often misguided care of a neighbor, or face the stark indifference of a crowded, fetid workhouse infirmary. Imagine the sounds, the low moans, the scent of unwashed bodies and carbolic acid, a smell that clung to everything, a grim perfume of resignation. Communication, that instant, invisible thread connecting us across any distance now, is utterly severed. A desperate message for help, a plea for guidance, for simple reassurance. How would you send it? There are no texts, no emails, No way to reach out beyond the range of your own weakening voice, which might be lost in the constant cacophony of the streets. And the social safety nets we so often take for granted, the systems designed to catch us when we fall, they are frayed to breaking point, or entirely absent for someone like you, a stranger without connection, without history, without coin. If you couldn't work, you wouldn't eat. It's a stark, brutal equation, this sudden, profound vulnerability, a world away from the reassurances we live with every single day. Not. So as the gas lamps begin to sputter, casting their weak, flickering glow over the cobbled streets, and the cacophony perhaps softens to a low, persistent murmur, you might find yourself still standing, or, more likely, slumped in some grimy doorway, if you're lucky enough to find one unclaimed. Your day, our hypothetical harrowing day, is drawing to a close. But survival isn't just about making it to nightfall, is it? It's about the state you're in. Think of the sheer accumulation. The air, thick with coal smoke and 1,000 other unmentionable scents, still coating your lungs. A constant, gritty reminder. The grinding noise that has battered